So here we are, end of January 2021. We have a new administration in Washington. We have an incredibly energized sense that things need to change. And we're looking at a moment that I've called a reflection on FDR's rendezvous with destiny moment.
The measure of that restoration lies in the extent to which we apply social values, more noble than mere monetary profit.
And the reason I think that is true is that there are all these forces that are beginning to exert pressure on the system as it is. And that's often what happens as you move through a major inflection point. So let's take a step back and look at what we were thinking about back in March of 2020. The pandemic had just become upon us. It was just beginning to reveal really egregious inefficiencies and inequalities in our social contract.
We have now created a dual class society. Call it 25, 75, 70, 30 at the most. That 25 or so percent of us are doing great. Life is as good as it gets. That ever had. It's like the boom in history for a large segment of a population. And yet the other side has been in terrible disarray. Up to 60% of homes until up to a few weeks ago when the last measurement happened, had to borrow money to put food on the table. And COVID now exposes all of this.
And at the time, people were asking me, well, what did I think the world would look like post-pandemic? And so I took a chapter from Seeing Around Corners and said, well, the way I think about it is you articulate a series of time zero events, which are things that might happen. And then you work backward and you say, what's the evidence that one or another of these scenarios is likely? And the two big uncertainties I picked to drive that analysis were, we have a new social contract or not. We continue with the trickle-down idea of the last 40, 50 years, and our economy comes back or it doesn't. And that gives us four scenarios. The first scenario is really what I call kind of Les Miserables, right? Bad economy, trickle down, masses of people not happy. That's not a good place to be. Lots of violence, resource constraints, resource competition, pretty grim. If the economy gets better, but we still have this trickle-down idea, then essentially that's rinse and repeat of the last 40 years and all of the inequalities that's created. The two other scenarios where we really do revisit the social contract were something I call the rendezvous with destiny, echoing FDR's moment, or even the Great Society 2.0, depending on what the economy does. And so here we are now, 9 months later or so, thinking about what are we looking at. And the one that's coming into clearer and clearer focus is this rendezvous with destiny moment. In fact, President Biden is now being compared to Roosevelt. His agenda is being compared to a New Deal. And I think it's very interesting that if you go back and trace the thought pattern back to March of 2020, you could actually see this beginning to emerge.